House will be in order.
It's a massive building we New Yorkers own up here in Albany. A massive building in which a massive job is constantly in work. A job that's done well, or not so well, depending on many things. Mostly, though, on us. There's a collection of workshops in there turning out a special product. It is here that our wishes, if enough of us wish them hard enough, are translated into laws. If you'd like to see that process in the legislature of the state of New York, come inside with us right now, and we'll see them in action. There's a flow to the process of translating people's wishes, many of them conflicting, into the will of the people, and translating that in turn into laws. The start of it and the finish are well outside this building. It starts and finishes, of course, back home throughout the state. But this is headquarters. This is where the action is. And how the action goes each year depends heavily on the legislature's leadership. Men selected by their brothers on the floor, the Speaker of the Assembly, the Senate's President pro tem, the majority and minority leaders in both chambers. 150 assemblymen, 58 senators, lawyers, most of them, some manufacturers, a few farmers, one funeral director.
You've been doing a great job up here, and you just go back to the people in your district and tell them.
I understand your bill came out of the committee today in the Assembly.
Yes, I'm happy to hear about it. I'm glad the news is getting around.
Well, we keep our ears open. We'll try to do what we can on the Senate side.
Taking you over to the Senate today, there's going to be some interesting debate. I think it's going to be exciting. Interested?
We've got to increase the annual subsidy for public housing. I'm going to push it in the Senate. How about the Assembly? Are you going to help me with that?
Push it in the Assembly, but how about the second floor? The governor has to sign it.
Yes, it is ornate. I suppose the architectural style is, what, Byzantine, Saracen, Baroque, Rococo, Hudson River, Baronial, perhaps, or Palazzo. But I like it. Of course, it is not the setting that makes the legislation. It has occurred in places like this or in open fields on one occasion at Runnymede. It is, I think, the quality of the men that you choose to be your legislator. You choose by the exercise of your vote in the elections in which you do vote. That's what makes the difference. The difference can be enormous. Once to the Assembly, you sent a 23-year-old Theodore Roosevelt.
For the rights of the people. We stand for the rights of the wage worker. We stand for his rights to a living wage. We stand for the rights and duty of the government to limit the hours of women in industry, to abolish child labor.
And some years later, from the east side of New York City, you sent the happy warrior, Al Smith.
Who is the forgotten man? He is all of us, Americans who have sought by thrift, hard work and sacrifice to save something for a rainy day.
To the Senate, you once sent two lifelong friends who later went to Washington. One a patrician of the Hudson River Valley, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Is it fair to approve a huge city boulevard and at the same time disapprove the improvement of a muddy farm-to-market road?
His friend, seated across the aisle, a German immigrant who later wrote the Wagner Act.
We must have democracy in industry as well as in government. Democracy in industry means fair participation by those who work in the decisions vitally affecting their lives and livelihood.
Another future U.S. president here was the Fox of Kinderhook, Martin Van Buren. Back in 1831, William Seward represented you before he became Lincoln's Secretary of State and, among other things, arranged the purchase of Alaska. It's hard to tell close up who today will be the standouts when today grows into history. But if elected, there are important things one can find out for sure. One can make out clear enough whose side you're on and who's on yours, and act accordingly.
Hey, look at on this Belmont bill. What's the difficulty there? What do you put it over for?
The problem was the bill was ready for passage last week, but I put it over to today.
The technical problems have been worked out now. You should.
They've cured those things now.
Yes, they have.
Well, I'll see that it gets out tomorrow.
It would be very helpful.
That'll be
fine. Thanks a million, Bert, and I'll look for you tomorrow and check with you.
One finds out also how a load of 8,000 to 10,000 bills can be processed in the usual legislative session. Work is by the minute. Preparations are year-round, organized in special ways by committees, research groups, open hearings, and closed caucuses, and most especially, constant touch with the district voters back at home. That part of it, the keeping touch, is probably harder today than ever, but certainly more practical, thanks to the latest models in communications equipment. The communications men seem to work much like they always have, same speed and all. Same questioning technique. The same favoring of headliners over less striking significant advances. But the extensive coverage they give legislative news today can help district voters keep the sharpest kind of eye on things. The reporter's row, backed against the rostrum, must be faced by every legislator, every time he votes, every time he makes a speech. The proceedings, once they're called to order, are bewildering at first. The short roll call, the reading of a bill reduced to the last section, raising the hand to vote only in the negative, all parts of what seems a strange, exotic ceremony. They are, in fact, a signal system, like the chant of the tobacco auctioneer and the hand signals of the floorman on the stock exchange.
Look upon us gathered here in this assembly. Shed upon us as a body, and upon each of us individually, the helpful spirit of thy grace.
Municipal law in relation to overtime compensation for public officers
Hold
or
that call for a
employees.
second. They're doing some work here. What do you want?
The section will take effect July 1, 64.
Lay it aside.
1905 by Mr. Bartlett, an act to amend the Surrey Gates Court Act in relation to virtual representation.
Bill is starred.
4814 by Mr. Black, an act to amend the membership corporations law in relation to non-profit waterworks corporations.
Read the last section.
The section will take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Abrams, Ingalls, Crabbe, Young, Levice, 137, noes none.
Bill's passed.
Literacy has nothing to do with intelligence. These men served faithfully in the Army, and not only that, but if you are literate or illiterate, you are bound to pay your taxes. We represent the people of the entire state. As I said before, we're proud of our franchise laws in this state. We're anxious to keep them that way, and these bills on the merits shouldn't come before us and shouldn't be passed.
All those in favor say aye, contrary nay. Clerk will read the title of the bill.
Number 1016 by Mr. Ramos Lopez. Concurrent resolution of the Senate and Assembly proposing an amendment of Section 1 of Article 2 of the Constitution in relation to literacy tests.
On the motion of Mr. Travia, those voting for the motion will be voting for the discharge of the standing committee. Those voting against will be voting to sustain the action of the standing committee. All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is lost.
There's one way of cutting through the jargon to what the action really is. Youngsters do it when they visit here, as they do by the hundreds every week. Their shortcut is to take the longer view.
The Assembly Art Gallery. The exhibits are changed every week.
The paintings are related to the work of the legislature. This one over here, down in the early 1800s, is called Politicians in a Country Store. Now, politicking was already a traditional skill, a workable way of stretching out and smoothing out differences, coming up with a solution which everyone could live with. And that is still, of course, a major task and achievement right here.
Some of the issues with us today have been around for as long as anyone can recall. A century ago, people passing Mrs. McCormick's place, pictured here, knew about juvenile delinquency, although they had a different name for it. Children, the concern we have with them, have always been a major legislative program. New York legislated state support for public schools back in 1866, an item which now gets near half the total budget of the state. 3 generations before an artist reporter sketched this scene, New York outlawed slavery, the year 1799. We've come a long way since, with the first child labor law in 1853, when many felt the unskilled drudgery of children was needed to build a thriving industry, with workmen's compensation laws in 1913, with a canal system which unlocked a continent's resources and helped to open it for settlement, and with the Erie's modern counterpart, the widest, longest throughway in the world. That's the long view of the action. Now take a shorter one of a single bill and how it comes to be. Intro number 4740, introduced in the Assembly, faces a committee hearing.
Don't hold that to be the proper
me. I have a responsibility, and I'm going to do.
I don't think that it should be that hard for them to figure it out.
Well, the trouble is that there's a background here in Albany County with respect to this type of legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, this hearing has been called to consider the legislation by Mr. McCloskey, introductory 4740, print 4926, to amend the real property law in relation to the sale of subdivided lands. As I understand it, this bill is designed to put provisions in the real property law which will protect people who buy land which is sold to them through advertising subdivided land. Is that right, Mr. McCloskey?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. A little elaboration. It affects only those who sell vacant land on the installment plan.
Frank, what's different about this bill that's not already covered by law? Mr. Chairman, can I have an explanation of it?
Yeah, it's my understanding that there is a section of the real property law now which provides for the filing of statements, verified statements, where you subdivide land and sell it. Why do we need this amendment?
Mr. Chairman, this is one section of the real property law where the buyer is afforded no relief whatsoever, no protection.
Plus the fact that we can't go out of state and extradite the man who sells this out of state. This is where we need it. He sells it in state, but he's out of state. We have to get our hands on it.
You know, Frank, I think your bill is laudable, but I don't know where you're going with it. Here you're making this crime, failure to report, a felony. Isn't that rather harsh?
That's not an undue restriction.
Well, you haven't let me finish. You know, the felonies in our state, murder, robbery in the first degree, this is a rather severe penalty, isn't it?
Well, this is a severe instance of millions of dollars involved, with people investing their hard-earned money at the end to be used at the end of their retiring years.
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
this bill might cause a real problem to some of us upstate counties. A lot of our farmers, you know, are going out of farming, and they are selling off a lot or two to raise cash, frankly, to put their children through school, for the most part.
Ms. Cook, we have witnesses who might be able to clear up some of these problems. Mr. Robert Caro, will you come in, please? Mr. Caro is a reporter for Newsday who did a series on this installment sales. Won't you sit right here? What do you know about installment sales to the people of New York, Mr. Caro?
Assemblyman, in a single county in Arizona, Mojave County, there are more than 13,000 square miles of worthless desert, land without water or roads or utilities. This land is worth about $2 an acre, but phony promoters are calling them retirement home sites and selling them to New Yorkers for $1,000 for a half an acre of sand. And the New Yorkers that they are aiming at are the poor and the elderly.
Thank you, Mr. Caro. Will you wait for us, please, in the event anybody wants to ask any further questions? Mr. Morton Davis, won't you be seated, please? Mr. Davis is one of the thousands of New Yorkers who have been taken in by some of this phony advertising. Mr. Davis, have you anything to enlighten the committee with on this?
Mr. Chairman, I'm a post office employee, and I expect to retire in a few years. 3 years ago, I put $10 down, became one of the suckers, and I paid $360 so far. Recently, my wife and I decided to take a little vacation and visit our retirement lots out in Arizona. I found nothing, not even a bird, not a rat, no sidewalks, no roads, no water, not even, I just feel disgusted. I've been taken, and I hope you can do something for us. I've been to see a lawyer. He tells me there's nothing I can do. I'm just stuck.
Anybody, any questions to address to the witness? I think he makes a pretty good case.
Mr. Davis, will you tell the members of this committee through what media you learned of this land?
Yes, Assemblyman, I learned about it after reading one of these glowing ads in the newspaper, and I was one of the suckers that answered it. I had a representative call on me, and he also described it in glowing terms, and I thought that I had a beautiful place to retire to with my wife.
Now, you gave him $10 when he called in person. How was the rest of the purchase price made?
After that, I paid $10 every single month.
If there are no further questions of the witness is excused.
Mr. McCluskey, how many people does this affect in New York State? How many people have been swindled by this method?
Here's a list of case history after case history in Newsday and these other articles as well. Have you read the magazines? Mr. Chairman, we need this bill right now.
Mr. Cohen, has this bill got the endorsement of the Attorney General and the Secretary of State?
Well, certainly, and I think the sponsor of the bill can tell you that.
We spoke to the Attorney General. You got his letter on file, Milton?
Yes, we have a letter on file. Not only that, Frank, if you remember correctly, last week we went down to talk to the Attorney General, and he told us the great need for the bill, of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going down the drain.
The effect of this bill is to make the purchaser fully aware of what he's buying and give him recourse in this state, in the state of New York, against the seller.
It fully protects the public when they deposit this money for the purchase of the land.
I'm for that, Mr. Chairman. Let's move this bill out on the floor where it belongs. I think the bill crosses party lines. It ought to be sent out on the floor on its merits, and I'm hopeful that the committee will vote accordingly. Thank you very much.
And good night to you.
As it turned out, the committee did vote accordingly.
40 noes.
An intro 47-4 was handed down for the Assembly to act on, one way or the other.
On relate to authorizing towns and villages with less than 1,000 population to make purchases from a vendor who has been awarded a contract for the same item by competitive bidding in another political subdivision.
The last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Abrams, Ingalls, Travia, Young, Levice, 140 noes, none.
Passed. Chair hands down the following bill. Clerk will read.
Number 4926 by Mr. McCloskey, an act to amend the real property law and relates to sale of subdivided lands.
The last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Mr. Speaker, I just this minute learned of the purport of the legislation which we are now considering. I have not had a chance to fully study this significant
We must move this bill now. If the bill doesn't come to a vote on the floor today, it's going to be dead for the rest of the session, and another $300 million is going to go down the drain this year, old people's money.
I most humbly request that the bill be laid aside until next week.
No, Mr. Speaker, I move this bill.
Mr. Speaker, I object to this bill because if this bill were enacted into law, the state of New York would then be policing the entire country to bring these people in from out of the state and prosecute them in this state. We don't have the money, and on that ground, I feel that the bill should be defeated.
Ladies and gentlemen, if the only objections to this legislation are technical ones, there are no objections. This is an emergency situation. This bill should pass now. I can tell you that there are 70 companies at this very moment soliciting sales in the state of New York for out-of-state lands. Estimated sales throughout this nation last year amounted to $700 million. And gentlemen, this is a situation which preys upon the poor and upon the elderly of our state.
Mr. Speaker, I object to this bill. This would throw hundreds of people out of work. The advertising men that write the ads and perform the services. The salesmen who sell the land.
Lay it aside. No, Mr. Speaker, I move this bill now.
Move the bill.
Without objection, the clerk will read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Abrams, Ingalls, Travia, Younglove. Ayes 132, noes 13.
Bill's passed. Clerk will read the title of the next bill.
Number 4535 of Mr. Ingram, an act to amend the education...
The next step is the Senate. The day starts in the Senate with distribution of the calendar, a summary of all matters scheduled for consideration. And with the summary, the book of bills in full. Assembly Intro 47-4 was brought with simple ceremony into what some have called the most beautiful legislative room in the country. It's a different room in many ways from the Assembly Chamber. A different group of men, too. Somewhat older, many of them. A little more accustomed to the role of mediating. The choices they must make are not just for or against. The choice is not to mediate between, on the one hand, the wish for greater opportunity in education, against the wish to keep down taxes, or for civil liberties, against a wish to nurse along a dying prejudice. There's a panorama of choices among which to allocate the resources of the state. And all of them are favored and opposed by labor, by bankers, by wine growers, by teachers, except, of course, for the few on which there is a consensus in the whole state.
State, and they buy out of state land. And there's over 70 organizations in the state now selling, advertising in the newspapers with no protection whatsoever in this matter.
Well, as you know, you've been talking to me about it for several days now.
That's right.
Good morning, Walter. How are you?
Bill, good to see you.
Henry, how are you?
Fine, Bill.
Good.
This is the bill that the Attorney General
that's right. He talked to me
worked it
about
out with
it,
the
too.
Secretary of State.
Yes.
There's been an article in one of the leading newspapers that went on for 4 or 5 weeks, and it's called Misery Acres, and it really points up this whole program.
You've sold me. Come on in, we'll see you get it going.
Senate will please be in order. The invocation will be offered by Reverend Robert J. Hoxema of the First Reformed Church of Bethlehem. Reverend Hoxema.
Let us pray. Most gracious God, we humbly beseech Thee for the people of this nation, for the governor and people and legislature of this state.
The first item on the agenda might be, as now, a special bill.
I don't owe my first allegiance to the state of New York. I owe my first allegiance to the federal government of these United States. If there is a particular program which is conflict with something the state wants to do, I'm certain we can sit down as reasonable men with the administrators of that program in Washington and work it out. We don't need some kind of a watchdog to watch over our president, over our elected members of the Congress. What kind of nonsense is this? Why are we allowing ourselves to be sucked into this kind of argument? I can only tell you I'm very disturbed, and I hope that this bill is defeated.
You get the opposition, and from across the center aisle, you get the supporting view of it.
This bill calls for information and more information. I'm sure the Senate does not object to having more information in a field which is one of the most obscure, particularly in state finance.
The next item might be, as now, reaction to a news report about the Senate.
I feel that I've had a personal rapport with most of the members of the Legislative Correspondence Association, whose friendship I value most high, and whose integrity can be questioned by no one. May I submit that this be a banner red-letter day in the history of this Senate, when we say once and for all, in a loud voice for all to hear, we will not be intimidated by one newspaper. We will not succumb and prostitute our judgment on the altar of editorial approval dictated by a quest for greater circulation. We
We will not be so decrepit morally. We will not be so weak intellectually as to succumb to that which they are trying to drive down our throats.
Third reading, 325 of Mr. McCluskey.
And ultimately, the work gets going on passage of the bill.
The sale of subdivided lands.
Last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect July 1st. Call the roll.
The pros and cons have all been ironed out on these, and among them, Assembly Intro 4740. The bill is now a law because, as its heading reads, the people of the state of New York, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact. That's the story of one bill, and there are some 9,000, more or less, each year. Affairs of villages, affairs of cities, education, finance, conservation, judiciary, touching almost every activity of man in a state of 16 million people. Their work, their health, their play, their children's growth and opportunities, their care in their old age, in illness and in birth. This year, some of the significant wishes which the people, represented in Senate and Assembly, did enact were these. Next year, well, that's up to you.